All right. We are now live, so we're very, as you can tell, we're a very formal organization.
That's what we like the best. This is on.
So, yes. Hello, everybody out there. I see people are starting to filter in, and I'm so glad to see you all. We have a great presentation coming up for us today. So Dennis is going to talk to us from Cathedral Stone and tell us all sorts of really interesting things. Cindy Belial says hello. So she says hi, Dennis.
Oh, hi, Cindy. I haven't talked to her in a while.
I'm going to give it about 5 minutes as we sort of let people filter in. So yeah, and oh, Michael Liguri.
Liguri, yeah.
Garoni says
Liguri.
hi as well. Says hi, Dennis.
Oh, Michael's on?
Yes, he is an attendee.
Cool.
So. Anyway, welcome everybody to the May CSINext meeting. We've got a real special presentation. Pardon me. One of these days I will learn to talk when I'm doing the introductions to these. We have a great presentation coming to you today. But while we're giving everybody a chance to come in, I'm going to talk a little bit about things that are upcoming. So next month, which is June, which is essentially the usual end of the spring end of our summer. We usually take summer off on the presentations, unless we have something great, which you never know. Keep your eye out. But we have a really great presentation coming up next month. It's going to be our awards and I will learn to talk. Our awards show and fun time. So we're going to do fun and games and show and tell. So keep your eye on the lookout. That one should be really fun. And so I'm hoping to see everybody there. During the presentation, if you have questions, if you have comments, questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, either one. And I will, at certain points in the presentation, when we have hit a pausing point, I will introduce those questions so that we can all hear them and get them answered. So let's see, what time is it? Oh, it's 2 after or so. All right. So as I say, I'm going to give it a few more minutes. Forgive my clumsy rapid patter here, but I trying to give as many people a chance to come in as possible.
We're fine.
So, all right. Yep. All right, 11.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, yeah, so during the presentation, as I said before, and if you just joined us, this is kind of our usual thing. If you have questions or comments or anything during the presentation, put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. I will read them out, and so we can all hear what's going on. And, you know, we're looking good. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker today. Our speaker today is Dennis Rood from Cathedral Stone. He is the owner of Cathedral Stone. And aside from 4 years in the Navy, he's worked on masonry buildings and monuments his whole life. He served an apprenticeship for stone cutting and stone masonry. And he spent years on the construction of the National Cathedral, and ultimately was the superintendent of Cathedral Stonework. He would later open Cathedral Stone Company, fabricating and installing stone for public and private projects. Today, Cathedral Stone Products manufactures and distributes a complete line of masonry restoration projects. And I know Dennis is going to have some really interesting things that we all want to hear. So I'm going to give it just another minute or two, and then we will sort of dive into this. I'm sort of giving folks a chance to come on in. So yeah, you are in control of the slides, Dennis.
Good.
All right. Give it about one more minute and all right. All right, we've got about a dozen people here, so why don't we get started? Dennis, why don't you want to take it away?
I will. Thank you. My first job after school was repairing limestone on a U.S. Treasury building in Washington. And as Kathy said, other than the Navy, all I've ever done is work on masonry. In this photo, I'm on top of the White House during the Reagan administration, replacing the cornice. I eventually finished my apprenticeship and ended up at the National Cathedral. We worked on a lot of buildings around town, but this was the best. Here's a photo of one of the keystones for the ceiling, one of the larger ones. They were two sizes. This was about 4 tons, still being moved like the Egyptians moved stone 2,000 years ago. And this is my stone plant in Washington. We eventually had about 40 people working, sometimes a few more or a few less. And we were good at what we did. I had really good masons. We took a lot of pride in our work. We tried to be the best around so that we would get repeat customers. And we used all the best materials that we knew of at the time, but sometimes we had failures. We couldn't figure out why they happened, when they did. They always bothered me, mine and everybody else's. This is the typical highway department DOT repairs that fail on a repeated basis. They're still using the same thing. And then pointing, failures like this. What happened here? Why are these things happening? Here's a lime pointing job in Holland. I've seen the same thing here in Maryland. Premature failures. This repair, this repointing was only 2 years old, but the mortar's all gone. It's too soft. It never cured. And then this is the Amtrak platform in Maryland, in New Carrollton, Maryland, where I catch the train to go to New York. And I noticed these repairs. Because I was catching that train a lot, I noticed the same area over several years. What I figured out later was because of salt and dense repairs. They put salt down to keep people from falling off the platform when the train's coming, of course. But the salt gets absorbed when it dissolves. And in the spring, when it recrystallizes, when the warm weather comes, it wants to get out and it can't. It's trapped by that dense repair. Portland cement's gotten a bad name over the years because of this kind of problem, but it's not just Portland. It's sometimes too much Portland. And these kinds of repairs that the different state highway departments use, all the infrastructure uses, it's polymers. Bonding agents, if you've heard that more than polymers, they're the same thing. Because that salt is migrating out, it's coming outside that repair, so these things get larger. Here it is 5 years later. The repairs now are a larger part of the platform than the platform is. So there's a tremendous cost to this. So I started studying failures back then. And in 1980, I got really serious about it. And I started trying to find out who's doing this better than us, who knows more than we do. And what I found generally, and this was before the internet, the search took a long time. I finally got the best lead, and that was in Holland. They were at the forefront of scientific investigation, so I went there to learn. I intended to stay 4 days on the first trip. I ended up staying almost 2 weeks. I had to go to town and buy more clothes because I just was learning too much to leave. And I saw things like this. The black that you see is an attempt to stop salt migration out of the wall, which was destroying the plaster. The footings in Holland are in salt water generally. The water table is only about 3 feet down. It's salt water, and the salt's continually wicked up. So they have a continuous problem that they've had to learn how to fix, how to deal with it. What you see here that's black is actually some sort of bitumen that they've applied in an attempt to keep the salt behind it. But you can't stop salt expansion. It just continues to build until it builds up enough pressure to blow everything off. And you see here a close-up of that same project. The white that you see coming through is the salt. You can't stop it. So how you treat that is very important. What we learned in Holland in the lab, and I went to several labs, in the first place, they do a salt analysis. As far as I know, we don't do that in this country. We do now at Cathedral Stone, but generally it's not done. They've had this problem for so long, they're way ahead of us. First, they measure how much salt there is. And secondly, they measure what type of salt it is. And then spend some time developing a mortar that will handle salts rather than trying to prevent it from coming out. We learned how to formulate mortars so that the salt can pass through and get to the outside. If it can get to the outside unobstructed, then there won't be a failure. That's me at the microscope in Holland, down below in the lab. And here is a finished photo of that same project. Instead of trying to block the salt, they allowed the salts to come through. They just colored the stucco or the plaster to let the salt come through. And now it just comes out, falls on the floor, and it gets swept up. There haven't been any failures now in over 20 years. They also study other things that we study a little bit, but they've gone much more depth. I've made over 40 trips to Germany, Holland, and France to study different types of problems and different types of solutions. They include freeze-thaw failures, expansion contraction failures, and permeability issues, and others. So I brought this back to the United States in 1982. I started importing this. As time went on, I bought the formula. We began manufacturing that here in the United States. We started in 2004, and we also set up a laboratory here for quality control and for new product development. This is an example of some of the things we're working on in our lab. You see that this sample, which is a cement mortar sample, put into a saltwater solution, a high amount of salt water, and it's saturated with the salt water. It wicks it up for 2 to 3 days. We take it out and dry it. When it dries, we reinsert it into the saltwater solution so that the salt starts being pulled into it again. It's like an accelerated salt test. Within 3 weeks, these samples explode because of the high amount of salt. If you make, what I left out was we put a water repellent coating on this. The water repellent trapped the salts. When you trap the salts, it's the same thing we saw before. It will cause that to explode. When we do this with a good mortar mix, without a water repellent or without a paint, then the sample does not explode. We used this technology on Reagan Airport. We restored the old part of the terminal, which is all concrete. We did on-site training to make sure that these guys knew what to do, how to use the materials. We did inspections weekly. Anything that we found that was unsound was removed and reinstalled. Did over 14,000 repairs on this project, some of them very large. Here you have an expansion, the rebar causing the problem. Out of 14,000 repairs after 15 to 16 years, we've had no failures. A lot of what I see in specifications call for repair mortars to go in layers. Anything with a polymer in it is only supposed to have about 1.5 inches in thickness, and then you have to wait to put on the second coat, sometimes up to 24 hours. With this kind of an engineered mortar, we're able to do massive repairs like this, 10 inches deep and more, all at one time. So it's much faster and it doesn't fail because there are no polymers in it and no coatings on it. The finished repair looked like that. We put back the form board marks, and then this entire structure was painted with potassium silicate paint, which is 92 perms out of 100. So that allows the masonry to still breathe. There's a before and after on the front of the airport. We did massive column repairs. There have been no problems there either. So what we hope to do today is to show you a few things that might help you get the best job you can get at the best price. Not necessarily the lowest price. We'll talk about that when we get into low bids.
Right.
But right
Dennis,
now,
if I can pause for a second. I have a question. Could you define pointing?
sure. On that slide
And this
right
may be a
there,
perfect slide for it.
that's pointing. That's replacing mortar joints in brick or stone. Some people call it tuck pointing. It's pointing, tuck pointing, whatever you want to call it, but that's what it is reapplying mortar to joints. I thought I should have said that, but I thought everybody knew what pointing was. My mistake. Any other question?
That's all I have for right now. But no, I just wanted to, before you get to, I did get another question. So when you do pointing, do you remove all of the old mortar first?
Old mortar that's deteriorated, if it's solid, it's fine. It can stay. If it's sound. If it's loose, anything loose has to come out.
All right.
So this shows how pointing is normally done. I'm going to show you a specification in the next section. It shows some of the mistakes made in specs that do not follow this. So we're going to be talking about pointing and lifts, layers, low bid, polymers or bonding agents, and water repellents. So we can jump right into the first one here, pointing and lifts. This is a specification we've run across a lot for repointing. You don't have to read paragraph 1, but paragraph 2, this is to show you how extreme some of these specs have gotten. If you read that, it says apply the first layer of pointing mortar to areas where the existing mortar was removed to depths greater than the surrounding areas. Confusing. Apply in layers not greater than 3/8 of an inch until a uniform depth is formed. Then compact each layer thoroughly and allow it to become thumbprint hard before applying the next layer. Probably everybody's seen this spec. It comes out of Master Spec and other places. I've had this for years. You still find it. But when you start to read paragraph 3, it says after joints have been filled to a uniform depth, place the remaining pointing mortar in 3 layers with the first and second layers each filling about 2/5 of the joint depth. Third layer, the remaining 1/5. Nuts. It's just ridiculous. When you read paragraph 3, it makes you go back to paragraph 2 to wonder what they were talking about. All of paragraph 2 is talking about, as confusing as that is, all they're talking about is evening up the back of a joint before you do pointing, just to even it. I don't know why anybody thinks it needs to be even. Doesn't make any difference. In fact, it causes problems. But let's assume you do that. If you go to 3 again, after joints have been filled to a uniform depth, that's what paragraph 2 is about, place the remaining pointing mortar in 3 layers. Why? Where did that ever come from? Place the remaining pointing mortar in 3 layers, with the first and second layer each filling about 2/5 of the joint depth. You people have to realize, I'm sure that nobody in this audience wrote a spec like this. It had to be somebody else. How in the world is a person on a scaffold supposed to calculate what 2/5 of a 3/4 inch joint is? This is nuts. Just take this, throw it out. Don't ever use it again. Write a spec. We'll show you how to write the spec so that you get a good job without all this. And if somebody actually got this job bidding this, let me back up. If somebody actually bid this, they'll never get any work. They may starve to death because their price then is going to be 4 times higher than everybody that does it the right way, which is all at once, like you saw. So if you see this, avoid it at all costs. Here's a diagram, also out of Master Spec, that shows you 1, 4, 5, and 6. 1 is the deteriorated mortar with the uneven background. Number 4 shows that the joint has been raked down to a sound mortar and ground to the proper profile. There's no reason for that. There's absolutely no reason for anybody to do that. It's totally unnecessary. And then put in a 1/4 of a lift of mortar, and then a successive 1/4 inch lift, and then the final. The problem with lifts, this is the same joint, same spec, simplified, also confusing. Not quite as bad as the other one, but not clear enough to anyone that has to do this work. It also says the same thing: even up the background and then put in lifts, allow them to become thumbprint hard before applying the next lift. In the first place, you're compacting it, you're closing all the pores. The second is, when you put in a 1/4 inch lift, those layers dry really fast. So when you try to put the second layer in, the first layer doesn't want to receive it because you've closed the pores. It's just designed to fail. So what should a spec accomplish? The best price or the best job? Both. What you don't realize in these specs, something like this, as confusing and as complicated as it is, even for me who studies this kind of thing, people using it don't read it. I'll give you an example. The reason they started it was, like I said, for lime. Lime shrinks. So does too much Portland cement. But you specify a mix of 116 or type O, type S, you shouldn't have that problem with Portland cement. A tip is always use white Portland, not gray. White Portland has a lower pH, so it doesn't stain like gray cement does. That's why we avoid gray cement. It causes staining in the surrounding stone. So this was done to reduce shrinkage. You don't have that problem with these mortars, and it's not working. That is too expensive to do work like that. 4 times the amount of work as the person who gets the job. Layers get compressed, as I said, causing bonding problems. It causes more problems than it corrects. And then to get back to my favorite, thumbprint hard. What if it's 50 feet long? At what point in that 50 feet is it thumbprint hard? It's just crazy. Please take these out of all specs you ever run into. This is how pointing is supposed to be done. Like I said, you see the mortar on the trowel, it's not soaking wet. That's why you have shrinkage, too much water or too much Portland or polymers. It's fairly dry, the joint's dampened, and the mortar is just pushed in there, one layer after the other. No weighting, no thumbprint hard, no compressing. It's just filled up and finished. It's done. So That's the end of that section. If anybody has questions, we'll take them now. The next one we're going to go into is low bid.
I don't see any questions, so I think you can go right ahead, Dennis.
Okay, thank you. So low bid. You really want the low bidder on your project? We see things like this. This is here in Washington, D.C. If the work doesn't matter, you can use the low bidder. But if it does, like this is something we were asked to come and look at in Manhattan. New York City Housing Authority building. It had been repointed a couple of years before, but it never stopped leaking. And the tenants, this is all low-income housing, the tenants were suing the city because of mold caused by leaking coming through these bricks. So we did an investigation. Those are two of my people there. This is what we found. The joints had been skimmed, which is just a thin coat of mortar to make it look like it's been cut out and repointed. It hasn't been cut out. They skimmed over it. Some areas they left out entirely. You see there in the middle, and things like this under the windowsill. No mortar was ever put in there. So they take advantage of this because they know nobody's going to go up there and inspect. Low bids are low for a reason. This is another one. I took this photograph up in Massachusetts near the entrance to Harvard. Again, another low bid culprit. And then this one. This one we've had recent experience with. This is one of our projects. I'm familiar with the quantities and pre-qualifications. The bids on this project, this was just one small phase, were around 600,000. Well, sorry, the highest one was around $600,000. The ones in the middle were 400, and the low bidder was 225. Guess who got the work? You're right, low bid. I worked on this project with the contractor. People who bid at the high end had figured at about 800 pails of mortar. People in the middle were at 600. The person who was the low bidder calculated 400. They actually used less than 200, and now the job's finished, and we can't provide a warranty because we don't think there was enough depth used according to the specs. We don't find the depth that was called for. So the client ends up with something they don't get a warranty on because of the low bidder. So the downsides to the low bid, besides this kind of work, the quantities are not correct. The workforce maybe not trained, and we don't know for sure what products they used. So you need to know that for your client. We prefer to hear about qualified bids rather than low bid. If you specify the quantities on a project, specify the mortar, and qualify the contractors, make sure you're getting good people that are up to date on their training and their certifications, and that they're bidding it properly, you'll get a better job. Ask the contractors how much they've included. In pointing, a lot of times I see square feet, which includes the bricks. Pointing is just the joint, so it needs to be in linear feet, and you need to specify the depth. That way, they're going to get the correct quantities. They're all going to be bidding on the same amount, so you're going to get better prices. This is a typical brick wall. We've done a little creative diagramming here to show you the way to measure pointing. Rather than square feet, go by linear feet. In this example, we're looking at about 150 linear feet of long joints, 110 feet of short joints, total of 260 linear feet. That way everybody's bidding on the same thing. If you're off on the depth, if it varies, we always put in a plus or minus. If you think it's 3/4 of an inch, put in plus or minus 3/4 of an inch, plus or minus 1/4 inch. So if it's a little less, they make a little extra money. If it's a little bit more, the client doesn't get hurt. They do it for the same price, and then they're all bidding on the same amounts. We teach classes here in different parts of the country every few weeks, sometimes every month. And bidding is such a weak part of this trade that we actually include a how to estimate quantities for mortar repairs. We have this one happens to be for cubic footage for repair pointing, sorry, not for pointing, for patching. People don't understand that you can't multiply inches. So we put a decimal equivalent chart in so that they know what to do. We go through this in the class, and then we give an example at the bottom so that the contractor knows how to bid correctly. If you give him the quantities, then he should have good prices on his purchases too. And then the big one, like the New York City Housing Authority, inspect the prep work and go look at what's been cut out before the pointing is done. And the way you control that is to do it in sections. It could be from the top down 2 floors and 1 elevation, or however you might break that up on drawings, and only allow work to be done there, and then have somebody inspect the prep work before the pointing is done. You can also ask, and should ask, for purchases from the supplier. Whatever mortar you're using, you should have a number from the contractor on how much he expects to buy, and it should be somewhere close to that in his purchases. He shouldn't be saying 400 and buying 200. There's something wrong if you see that. So it takes a little extra work on your part, but you'll end up with a much better job and fewer site visits. So you should appoint somebody, assign somebody the responsibility to do the inspection. Better specs, get better bids. You can trust but verify, just like the old saying goes. That's the end of the pointing section. Any questions?
We did have one question. How soon after the pointing mortar is applied can a water repellent be applied to it?
We generally say at least a week.
Okay. That's all the questions we have for the moment. So
good.
Straight on.
We're going to be talking about water repellents before this is all over. The next section is bonding agents or polymers. This is about understanding permeability and breathability. Masonry is supposed to breathe. It just naturally absorbs and expels water. It's supposed to do that. It's supposed to allow it in and it's supposed to allow it out. Anything applied to masonry or used in it must have a higher perm rating than the masonry. That's what it's going to take to be successful with this kind of work. But in the 50s, the industry changed because of the introduction of a new product, bonding agents. This is a Google lookup that we did. You see at the top of the page, some of those smaller consumer products might be recognized, not recognizable, Loctite, and a few things like that. And then the larger ones down below, they're all glue. In all of our work, we talk about compatibility between the substrate and what you put on it. The mortar, the water repellent, they have to be compatible. These are not compatible. No matter how much advertising you read, they're not breathable enough for masonry. These were intended to be used on polymer concrete, modern concrete, where they've mixed a polymer in to help make them more water repellent. Then you can use a bonding agent. But for masonry and any other category without a bonding agent made in the manufacturer, this doesn't work. This is what's leading to a lot of problems. Mixing glue with mortar makes no sense. It never has. I want to show you a demo right here. Bear with. Okay, show you part of what I'm talking about with bonding agents. Almost all DOTs use polymer bonding agents and polymer modified concrete, things like that. The repairs in the infrastructure in the United States fail on average of 5 years, 90-some% fail. That's why these infrastructure estimates are so high, because failure rates. They also have to pour most of them, which means forming, pouring, and dismantling. But when you look at what polymers do, we've done this in our lab. This is concrete. We've sawed to this size. We have another one here, same size. Excuse me. These were in salt water, a saltwater solution, high saltwater solution, for 2.5 years. We put them in, just like we do our other samples, into the saltwater solution and let them absorb for weeks. And we take them out and dry them, and we put them back in again. So the reabsorption starts again, or the absorption starts again. After 2.5 years, we took these out, and this is what we see on the one with polymers in it. You see the broken edges and the color? It's because of bonding agents. The edges of this are breaking off. You can see what happens. This is why these highway repairs are failing. Here's one that we developed with no polymer in it, in the same solution for the same amount of time, treated exactly the same. There's no deterioration on the edges. There's no discoloring. There's no debonding. You don't need bonding agents. You see that? It's sticking just as well as the other one is with no bonding agent. Don't believe what you read about this stuff. They market these as an improvement, but unless it's polymer modified concrete, they have no place. Fair enough. We'll go back to the presentation now. So in spite of the higher expansion contraction rate and the higher bond strength, you don't need that. It still doesn't work. What else bonding agents did is it took away the skill level. You can take anybody in any office and give them a bonding agent, tell them to mix it with a mortar mix, and they can make it stick. That's what it's done. It's allowed anybody to do this, but they're probably not trained. They don't know how to use something that's natural and compatible. They have to depend on a bonding agent, and the bonding agents are what's causing the failure. Here's a project in Manhattan. Polymer modified stucco, cracked. Nice job, but it's all one monolithic thin coat. There are no joints. Those are false joints. In fact, what they did was cover up the real joints. Those two cracks you see on either side of that vertical joint are where the original joints were. Anybody that knows anything about construction knows that there has to be a joint there for that lintel that comes over that window. So the joints are showing themselves, the repairs failing. The poor homeowner's out about $7,000 to $8,000 and has to be done again. And there are more cracks. If you look further left, there are cracks everywhere. This stuff just doesn't work. Here's another one, also in Brooklyn. Thin coat, poor job. They didn't match up the joints. You can see it's all delaminated. It's cracked everywhere, and it's efflorescing. And this is in Philadelphia again. The other thing about polymers are they are UV sensitive. They fade in sunlight. That was brown 1 year before. I was taken to this project by a contractor who was using different mortar 1 block away. He said, this is what it looks like after a year. And I was at Stanford University consulting on some of their buildings and found work going on there around the corner from where the architect and I were standing. There were some guys there cutting out and repointing joints in stone. And this was their wheelbarrow they were mixing in with a bottle of acrylic in the mortar mix. So I went over to ask them if this was in the specifications. They said, no, but we always do this because it makes it better. So that's what people think, but I can tell you it's a mistake. We made this graph to show you a little bit about masonry, breathability, permeability. Masonry generally with what we work on runs from 25 to 35 perms out of 100. If you add a polymer to a mortar mix, it drops down to in the neighborhood of 10. They could be 8 or they could be 10 or they could be 12. Doesn't matter. It's still too low. Anytime you see a water repellent, a paint, any kind of coating, anything of that sort, the perm rating needs to be high. On the mortar mix on the right, designed mortar mix, perm rating's 50 and above. So it's compatible enough for the masonry. It's not going to trap water. It's not going to freeze thaw. It's not going to have any polymers in it. One more time.
Dennis, we're not hearing the sound on the video.
Let us start over. Can we do anything with sound?
As you can see here, water is going to drip through, simulating that natural
Can you hear it
masonry
now?
has a perm of about 30.
Yes, now we hear it.
See here,
Start it over.
air is going to travel through
We need to start.
this masonry surface with no blockage.
We're going to start it over.
This would be considered
That looks good.
Hey guys, Michael Ligori here at Cathedral Stone's headquarters in Maryland. Today we're going to be doing a demo on permeability. Here we have a Buchner funnel with a ceramic disc, and this is going to be used as our control sample to simulate basic masonry that has not been coated or treated. As you can see here, water is going to drip through, simulating that natural masonry has a perm of about 30. So as you can see here, air is going to travel through this masonry surface with no blockage. This would be considered permeable. This ceramic disc is coated with an elastomeric paint. Elastomerics claim to be breathable, but they only receive a rating of about 7. That is not close to breathable enough for a masonry surface. This is going to build up pressure and eventually cause a failure of the paint. Let's see how latex fares. As you can see here, again, moisture not being allowed through this latex coating, no bubbles coming up through the top, building up pressure and causing a failure.
That's good too.
And this is a clear, breathable water repellent. Water is passing right through this coating with no issues. Again, this is a 97 perm rating, completely permeable virtually. And then we have the potassium silicate coating. This is a 92 perm. Add some pressure, some air coming right through. So here, this demonstrates no pressure buildup, no blockage. You can expect a long-lasting coating as a result. It's important to keep in mind this is a molecular bonds. This is not a adhesive bond, so you can expect this process to continue for years to come. So that will conclude the demo on permeability. Please check back to our website, cathedralstone.com, for additional information and videos. Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay. So I put this graph back up so we just repeat what we told you before. Masonry, generally between 25 and 35. It always has to stay that high and higher if we can get it. Anything you put on it or put in it needs to be that high or higher. The higher, the better. The other thing about polymers is they're UV sensitive. These repairs, this is at Harvard, by the way, these repairs were brown when they were installed. Within 6 months or so, they were white because the UV breaks down the color and they bleach out. These all had to be replaced. The other thing that happens with polymers in masonry, because during the mixing, the polymers get mixed up, they form globules inside the repair. During a winter, those globules will break when they freeze and they run down the face of the masonry and they can't be removed. You see, you don't see any in this photo. On the front of this building, they're evident. I don't have that slide here. Here's another project in Virginia. Polymers again, these were brown. Less than a year, they were this color. They had to be replaced also. And then the marketing with polymers, higher expansion contraction rate should cause your heart to skip a beat. Once you know a little bit, you see things like this. This is a repair that we did for a test in our laboratory. We cut a pocket in a piece of limestone and installed a polymer modified mortar mix with a highly rated, a high expansion contraction rate. Too much of a good thing can cause this. This happened in less than 24 hours, inside, not out in the weather. And it broke the entire front off this. These things were unnecessary. They were always unnecessary. They're marketed well. Everybody uses them. It makes it easy for anybody to do this work, but it's not good long-term. So you need compatibility between whatever's being repaired or pointed and what's being used on it. You don't need a higher bond and you don't need an expansion contraction rate that's so high. Any questions? We're going to go into water repellents next.
Dennis?
Yes.
Yeah, we do have a question. We have two, actually. One of them goes back to repointing, saying, before repointing, how do you clean the wall and prepare it? Water, brooming it? What are suggestions?
To clean the surface of the masonry or the joint?
Either or both, I guess.
Well, a cleaning product if it's necessary. Otherwise, you don't have to. If the building's dirty, yes, you can clean it before the pointing. But that's kind of a loaded question, because if there are open joints, the open joints should be filled before you clean, because water is going to get into the building. So sometimes it's done as a temporary measure to clean and then cut it back out. Cleaning of the joints don't require anything except to make sure that the mortar that's remaining is sound. Whatever you put in there is only going to be as good as what it's attached to. So it just needs to be solid. The mortar needs to be sound. Clean the building before the pointing, because a lot of pointing gets done sorry about that. A lot of the pointing gets done with mortar that's too wet. They smear it a lot and get it on the bricks. And then if that happens, you have to use an acid to remove it. So pointing is not supposed to be done wet. A lot of people that point that haven't been taught properly use mortar at the consistency of bricklaying mortar. It's too wet. Pointing mortars to go in like damp sand. Allow it to dry for an hour or two, brush off the excess, and then rinse across the joints with a wet sponge. But cleaning the length of the joint is a mistake, and high pressure cleaning because of mortar smears is also unacceptable. Another question?
Yes, I do have, and I'm not sure I understand this question. So it's from Cindy Belial. Cindy, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to speak so you can ask the question about your question about synthetic materials. So you should be able to talk now.
I can't hear anyone.
Cindy? Cindy, I've turned you on for talking. So she says, her question, she can't figure out how to do it. She says, please confirm the use of synthetic materials. Dennis makes products that are natural. I'm not, are you saying that you shouldn't use any synthetic materials in your masonry, or if, beware of using synthetic materials? What, I'm not 100% sure what you're asking. Or Dennis, are you suggesting that all synthetic materials are bad, all polymers are bad in masonry?
For what we do, yes. For masonry maintenance and restoration, unless they've got something that already has it in it, it doesn't need it. So it causes more long-term problems than any benefit it provides.
Okay, I hope that has answered your question. So if not, just do me a favor and type a follow-up, and why don't you go ahead and move on forward, Dennis?
All right. Water repellents. So what are water repellents used for? To keep water out, to keep the building clean? Both sometimes. The other question you have to ask yourself is, how long will it last? If you read the instructions on most water repellents, they say must be reapplied in 5 to 7 years. The reason is most the chemicals that have been in use forever for water to form water repellents that form the basis of a water repellent is a silane or a siloxane. And they're sensitive to UV light, just like the polymers are. So they start to break down when you put them on a building. The higher the sun, the more sun exposure they get, the faster they wear out. So you have to realize that what else happens is they wear out at the top first, where the sun's hotter. So water can get in higher up on a building, and when it gets down to the bottom, it can't get out. So you have to go into this with both eyes open. You need high perm rating on water repellents, like that water repellent we talked about. The chemistry was changed on that. Doesn't have any silane in it. It's not affected by UV. Lasts 10 to 20 years minimum, and it's 97 perm. So if it's higher perm, if it has a high perm rating, it's okay as far as we're concerned. Old chemistry in water repellents, they're sensitive to UV. They have to be reapplied. New chemistry, they're not affected by UV. They'll last 10 years plus. We were just on this building last week in Indianapolis. We put on samples. We hope that our cleaning and water repellents get used on this, because the cost of a better material is minimal. The real cost is in the scaffolding and the labor if it has to be redone. Keep that in mind. It's more expensive, but it lasts longer. If you're doing the Empire State Building, see the scaffold there? We worked on this building for 11 years to help the contractor restoring the limestone. When you put a water repellent on it, you have to think about it, what it's going to cost to reapply it in 5 to 7 years, who's going to remember to do it, and who's going to pay for it. So remember, you should get the best price and get the best job. We've talked about pointing and lifts, low bid, bonding agents, and water repellents. I hope I've given you some tools to use in your spec writing. If you have any questions, please forward them. We're glad to answer them for you, and we look forward to doing this again. If you have any questions, you can send them directly to me, Dennis Root at cathedralstone.com. Thank you.
Excellent. One last question, Dennis.
Sure.
Do you recommend mock-ups, or do you find mock-ups are of any value for this sort of remedial work? Picking
Yeah,
a section of the building and calling it a mock-up?
Yes, they're one
Go
of the
for it.
best things you can do.
Excellent.
Well,
Another question, what about I'm sorry, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, we suggest mock-ups. Any questions can get answered there. You make sure things are being used correctly. It's good for everybody. So you had another question?
Great. Yes, I do. What about anti-graffiti coatings? What are your experience with those?
There's nothing good to report. Old anti-graffiti coatings, of course, were popular. The idea is terrific. The problem they had, primarily there were two. They get shiny. You put them on a stone building, and after they're out in the weather for a little bit, they get a gloss. So you see that a lot in the cities where a water repellent, or sorry, not a water repellent, a anti-graffiti coating's been applied before. As you drive down the street, if you see the bottom of some of the buildings that have a shine, that's because of an anti-graffiti coating. They're ugly as the devil, and they're sticky. They get really bad. They really start to look bad after a few years because everything in the air sticks to them. So they get really dirty and you can't get them off. So I don't have a good answer for that. Water repellents help some. Armed guards also are a good idea. Other than that, we've had 1,000 calls in this last year, a lot from Seattle and Portland, Oregon, which we all saw on the news. We can help them. I do have a suggestion. We work a lot with the Park Service here in Washington. And of course, we've got all the monuments that draw the tourists. It's a beautiful city with beautiful monuments, but graffiti here is a problem just like it is everywhere else. And the Park Service is in control of these. And the mistake that people make that we caution them against is not to go apply anything that's a solvent to try to get it off, because especially in Washington, you've got a high profile building and graffiti gets on it. They want to get it off immediately, of course. But once you've used a solvent, solvents will not take it off. They will dilute it a little bit, but when you dilute it, it goes deeper into the masonry and it gets a little fainter, but wider. So it gets bigger, but a little more faint. And at that point, you can't help it anymore. You just do not use solvents. Call us or somebody that works with this kind of thing first, and then we have a chance to get it off. The other thing about graffiti is, depends on what it is, whether it's a magic marker or acrylic paint or latex paint, or like the graffiti artists really know their business. What they prefer is automobile paint because it's damn near impossible to get off. So call us first. We'll try to help you with that, but don't run out and put a solvent on it.
Dennis, I've had some experience in the city of Los Angeles. They use a right size, I guess it's a solid hydrogen, it's a hydrogen, or it's a frozen gas that they basically pelt at the surface, and then when it hits the surface, it freezes the paint layer, breaks it up, and then evaporates immediately. Have you had any experience with that and had any luck with it? And does that damage the surface of the masonry?
I have not. I'm all for new technology. I don't know much about that, but it sounds realistic. I would consider that.
Great. All right. If anybody has any more questions, let's see. Ask Dennis to talk about the training at his plant.
I'm sorry, training of what?
I guess your training of people, I guess, that you do training at your plant?
Yeah. When I first started selling mortars, natural mortars. I brought them to this country and I started driving around showing them to people, and they got a little popular. So when people ordered them, I sent it. I thought everybody knew how to use this kind of thing. It's so easy, it's ridiculous. But I found out that those skills had, to a large extent, gone away because of, I guess, because of polymers and lack of training. So we had so many failures because of application that I started requiring training. We did it for a year. First year was free and voluntary. But I sent every one of my customers a letter and said, it's voluntary for this year and it's free, so please come. But if you don't come by the end of this year, I will not sell to you anymore. So there was a cry that went up across the country when I refused to sell to people, but I did. And what happened was architects and engineers started to see the benefit of the training, and it got really popular. We've trained thousands and thousands of people. Sometimes we were training as many as 600 a year. And that's gone on since '84. We've trained about everybody now, and now we're training their sons. And it's just been a lot of fun, and we've met a lot of good people, and it's been well received. The training surprises some people because it's hands-on. And I've had a lot of instances where people show up on Monday morning for a class, hand us a check and want to leave with their certificate. But we don't do that. They have to actually learn how to do the repairs. And if they don't do well, they don't get a certificate. And we keep those filed by state and by year. So everybody that we've trained, with almost everybody we've trained, we have a record of and what state they're in and what their trained applicator number was. So it's been very, very beneficial. It's been popular for our mortars. It's been very popular with specifiers. We've been asked to do more pointing, stone cutting, and things like that. And we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't had the time, but if anybody wants to come, you're certainly welcome. And by the way, it's free to specifiers. Contractors have to pay because they're going to get a license to do the work, but specifiers, we'd like to see you here. We'd like to be able to show you how this stuff works and how easy it is and how foolproof it is. So any other questions?
That's all I see for now, but it sounds great. I wish I was in the DC area so I could take your training.
Well, there's a way
that sounds wonderful.
There's a way you can get here, you know.
Yes, but I am on the wrong end of the country right now, and and I don't know about you, but I'm not especially wild about the thought of getting on an airplane quite yet.
No, me either. I've been on one flight the last 14 months, and it wasn't fun.
No, but I will keep this in mind so that the next time I find myself in the DC area, you may be getting a phone call from me.
Please do.
So. We
welcome anybody.
This was wonderful. There's a lot of fantastic information here. I hope everyone enjoyed it. We had some great questions, and just I want to thank you very much on behalf of CSINext. And if anyone has any additional questions, can they? Well, you've got your email up there, so I'm hoping you'll just allow them to email you and keep this great conversation going.
Look forward to it. We have plenty more. We've got planned that are in the pipeline, other presentations on other aspects of restoring and maintaining masonry. So we may see you again. Thank you for your time.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, if you've got more presentations, shoot me an email. I'd love to get you on the schedule again. So
I appreciate that.
All right.
Rhett, this is Rhett Murphy. Rhett's worked hard with me for the last week or two putting this thing together, and we've both been looking forward to getting this thing getting it done. And now we're going to go have a drink.
Yes.
Sounds like it's well deserved. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a lovely week and a great rest of the month, and we will see you in the beginning of June for the end of the year fun and games and awards ceremony for CSINext. So thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Cathedral Stone. Much appreciated.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.